So we are on air, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Hello to everyone. I'm Velikaya from Moscow. Welcome to Tillotoma Foundation's special session, Iran and Strategic Connectivity in West Asia, that would focus on key connectivity infrastructure projects in the region that are getting crucial importance. Currently, Chabahar is Iran's only oceanic port, and the country is seriously considering the establishment of another on Makran coastal strip on the Gulf of Oman. Tehran has ambitious plans to extend the railway line from Zahedan to Mashhad and then to Sarax on the border with Turkmenistan. Another plan is to link it with the international north-south transport corridor towards Bandar Anzali on the Caspian Sea. Iran's domestic economy since the sanctions has witnessed a decline, and now with the pandemic has only worsened. Its economy requires investments. Special economic zone was created, but reimposition of US sanctions had slowed it. Meanwhile, Iranian presidential elections will be held in the following year. We will discuss it with our esteemed experts. And as for the regional powers, India was given a waiver from US sanctions to continue cooperation on Chabahar as it contributed to Afghanistan's development. India concentrated on the road to connect Zaranj to Dilaram on the Herat highway. We will discuss the current situation regarding this project and also Chinese ambitious plans for the region with its Belt and Road Initiative. Also, during this session, we will analyze the dynamics of relations between Iran and neighboring major powers. Russia has recently proposed 5+1 group online meeting. So I'd like to present our esteemed experts. These are Nikita Smagin, journalist, political analyst, and founder of Iran Today. He's today with us from Iran. Also, I'm glad to present my colleague from Institute of World Economy and International Affairs, Russian Academy of Science, Dr. Stanislav Pritchin. Also, he is associated with Russia and Eurasia program, Chatham House. Also, I'm glad to present Mrs. Zohreh Khanmohammadi, doctoral candidate in international relations, Islamic Azad University of Tehran, Markaz, Iran. Also, our today's distinguished speaker is His Excellency Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, former Indian ambassador to Jordan, Libya, and Malta, Secretary Association of Indian Diplomats. And also our distinguished expert is Dr. Waiel Awwad, senior journalist and political analyst, winner of the Freedom of Speech Award. And also I'm glad to present here my colleague, Soham, director of Tillotoma Foundation. So Nikita, the floor is yours. And we have about 10 to 12 minutes.
So thank you.
Nikita, can you hear us? We just can't hear you now.
I think we lost him.
Okay,
he's no longer in the. We lost.
Okay. Stanislav, could you please help us? Would you be so kind to be our first speaker, and afterwards we would ask Nikita, hoping that he'll be back with us.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. Thank you very much for this invitation. It's really great honor for me to join this session and to share with you my vision how Iranian connected with Iranian infrastructure projects now developing in the region, and which restrictions and opportunities they will open for cooperation generally in Eurasia. Due to my work, I mostly will focus in my presentation on the north part of the network transportation Iran. Sorry? Okay. Today we cannot consider this region and connection between Iran and its partners in the region without influence of global actors. First of all, United States, which really working hard on the purpose to cut any connections between Iran economic connections, political cooperation with its partners in Eurasia. In such circumstances, of course, any projects are under risk of being under sanctions by the United States and its allies. And this is a real restriction and obstacles for cooperation in the region. Considering projects and plans, we, of course, have to, first of all, consider political plans and strategy of Iran towards its north area of foreign policy. Before, for example, 2012, from my perspective, Eurasian direction of foreign policy of Iran wasn't so active and wasn't the huge priority for Iranian foreign policy. Since Hassan Rouhani came to power, relations with Central Asia, Russia, and South Caucasus countries, from my perspective, became one of the main priorities for foreign policy. But of course, Iran at this period of time had to invest much more time and resources to develop this direction of its foreign policy and realize all potential of cooperation. Among projects which started to develop at this period of time was North-South International Transport Corridor. The main idea of this project is to connect India through the Persian Gulf, through domestic infrastructure of Iran, and then through Caspian Sea, through the transport roads on the eastern sea coast, through Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan, and through the western sea coast, through Azerbaijan with Russian infrastructure and further with European market. In case of implementation of this project, the transport road cut for 10 days faster than through Suez Channel by ships. And of course, from the economic point of view, this is quite important projects for using, for example, transport potential of Iran. What we have today since 20 years of implementation of this project. Russia completed all its duties within this project, and Russian infrastructure is ready for transporting goods from India. Azerbaijan also invested and extended capacity of its infrastructure, domestic infrastructure. And moreover, Azerbaijan invested money for infrastructure for connection between Azeri infrastructure and Iranian infrastructure, between Astara Irani and Astara Azeri. The only problem now, there is a part of Iranian infrastructure between Kazvin and Resht. According to official statements, these railways will be completed next year. If it happens, in this case, the full-fledged projects which connects the Persian Gulf with the Russian infrastructure would be being for using. And of course, this is very important for Iran, and not just for Iran, for cooperation between Iran and Russia, between Central Asia and South Caucasus countries. There is another project on the table. Uzbekistan now is developing projects for connection with Afghanistan and has plans to extend this from Mazar-e Sharif to Girat. And the further goal for this project is connection with the domestic infrastructure of Iran and further to achieving the sea ports in the Persian Gulf. For Uzbekistan, this is extremely important from the point of view of its export-oriented strategy of economic developments. The only problem here only is again position of the United States. On the one hand, United States supports attempts of Uzbekistan to develop economic relations with Afghanistan, but is trying to cut any opportunities for connections between Iran and Uzbekistan through Afghanistan. And this is unfortunately the real problem, despite the fact that this is quite expensive project and quite technically difficult, because geographical location of these transport roads, it's quite problematic for construction. Talking about Belt and Road Initiative, today Iran has quite strict connections through railways with Belt and Road Initiative through railways which was completed in 2014 through Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan. According to official statistics, this project is used not for full capacity. For example, for 2019, only 1 million tons of goods was transported through this direction of export. And from my perspective, of course, this is not enough for full-fledged cooperation between Iran and its neighboring countries in Central Asia. And here again, we're talking about the main restrictions. In situation when Iran is not the part of the SWIFT system of bank exchange information, it's quite difficult to support any cooperation between Iran and its partners. So, for example, experience of Russian-Iranian trades when it's has been declining for last 10 years, again, due to several obstacles of cooperation in financial areas. So, well, as a conclusions, on the one hand, we can see that system of networks roll a different kind of railways, seaports in the Caspian Sea. All system of these transportation routes help and don't disturb relations between Iran and its partners in the Eurasia. But at the same time, other restrictions such as political pressure, sanctions and risk of sanctions for companies from these countries to cooperate with Iranian counterparts. This is the real problem for regional trade and cooperation. And the only way to couple this problem is to create alternative infrastructure, financial infrastructure for exchange money, to create a special independent from Minister of Finance of United States system of financial exchange to create this local independent and stable system of cooperation without influence and risk to be banned from external players. So, of course, this is not easy problem which might be solved easily in several years. Of course, it have to be the real goal for cooperation, and only with participation and investments from all sides, this problem might be solved in the future. Thank you very much for your attention. I will be happy to answer your questions if you have.
Anna, unmute yourself.
Okay. Stanislav, just one small brief question, and comparing capacities of Chandahar port and Gwadar Pakistani port, what would you say? It's a strong competitor for Iran.
On the one hand, this is a strong competitor. On the other hand, in case of problem in the Persian Gulf, Gwadar port is the alternative roads for Iranian goods for this crisis situation. And in case of development, all of implementation, all plans of Iran to construct railways, which connects this port with partners in the north, from Central Asia, from Russia, I suppose Iranian project is much more perspective, because Iran is developing cooperation with its countries, with its partners in the north. And in such circumstances, of course, they will prefer to use Iranian infrastructure rather than Pakistani.
Thanks a lot. And now Nikita is back with us. So Nikita, the floor is yours. Thanks a lot, Stanislav.
So sorry for these problems. And well, beginning, I want to thank for organizing this event and for inviting me and other guests. I want to focus on some strategic problems that face Iran and other countries involved in developing this project. So we'll have to start with Russia. Russia is involved in developing north-south corridor, and Chabahar port is considered to be one of the most important part of this corridor. And of course, for Russia, one of the main goal of this corridor is to get access for Indian goods and to develop it in this way. But the corridor right now formally exists, but it doesn't exist and as a single integrated route. From Russian perspective, as we can see from Russian development strategies, Russia doesn't consider this corridor, north-south corridor, as a primary concern. So in Russian development strategies, we can see that the development of this project is postponed for the future. So in nearest future, it exists still, some parts of it exist some parts of this corridor can work effectively, and they do work effectively, serving regional cargo flows, but it doesn't exist as the whole project, still as a completed project. And from Russian perspective, it's just the question of the future, not nearest future, not nearest 2-3 years. From Indian perspective, the thing about north-south corridor is the problem of this is that India has relatively small export to Europe. During last 10 years, from 2008 till 2019, the Indian export to Europe almost doubled from 29 billion to more than 45 billion. But the share of European export in Indian export decreased. It's now about 15%, and it was around 18% 10 years ago. So for India, this is more political thing, and that's why India is more interested not in developing north-south corridor, but in developing this route to Central Asia. This is also not economical goal, first of all, but first of all, it's a political goal to influence Central Asia, to increase its influence in Central Asia. So now I'm coming to Iran, and this is, of course, the main country in developing these projects. And the first problem that Iran faces is infrastructural problems. For example, in the north-south corridor, Iran is with no doubt the most weakest part of this project. More than 2/3 of Iran's railway are single track, and this is one of the main problems. And also, speaking about Iranian infrastructure, we can say that Iran is developing its infrastructure being isolated from international investment, from international projects, from international technologies. And to some point, Iran succeeded to do some things to develop its infrastructure. But the problem is that when its self-developed infrastructure will be open for foreign investments, for foreign business, it will be not that easy to combine this infrastructure with international standards. It's the problem. We can compare it, for example, with the problem of Soviet Union after the collapse of Soviet Union, when many of Soviet's infrastructural projects, many of Soviet companies, many of Soviet factories the international business couldn't use it for their goals, and that's why in Russia we had a lot of problems with using them, and many of them were just closed. So of course, it's not that the problem is not that big as it was in the Soviet Union after the collapse of it, but still, the more Iran will be isolated, the more Iran will be under sanctions, the more this problem will influence the development of this projects in future. So as I already mentioned, sanctions and isolation, we can't speak about this project without mentioning sanctions as a big challenge for developing all projects in Iran, and including the infrastructural projects that connect Iran with Central Asia. And we can see that sanctions influence not only directly these projects. For example, Chabahar port and railway from Chabahar to Zahedan, that is considered to be invested by Indians, is excluded from sanctions, from American sanctions. And the US government doesn't sanction them, but still this summer, just several weeks ago, we saw some problems that Iranian side announced that Indian government doesn't delays funding the Chabahar-Zahedan railway because actually it was because of sanctions. Nobody mentioned sanctions just officially, but to understand that the main problem is sanctions, and sanctions really restrict the abilities to invest, even when they're not affected directly, but indirectly. Many companies are just afraid of investing in Iran during sanctions. We can also mention, for example, Russian Azad, Russian railway company that ended its projects in Iran because of sanctions, although Russia doesn't accept sanctions, but still Russian big companies still have problems. Even Russian big companies have problems with working with Iran during sanction area. Another thing that I want to mention, that is problem of Iran and investment in Iran, is I can say that in Iran we can say it like too much security issues. What I mean that in Iranian government have two goals, speaking about investment, and sometimes these two goals exclude each other. The first goal is to attract as much foreign investments as possible, but another goal is prevent foreign investments from penetrating areas and spheres in country that's considered to be critical for national security. This is why some of projects, some of investments didn't succeed because Iranian security, Iranian IRGC, for example, they said that this sphere, for example, can be influenced by foreigners. That's why you can't invest here. We can mention, for example, Iranian airport in Tehran. Foreign companies were interested in investing to, it was before Trump, and foreign companies were interested to invest money in developing, in reconstructing Iranian airport. But at some point, IRGC said that foreign companies can't invest it because it's this object, the airport is considered to be critical for Iranian security. Of course, every country shall think about its security, and the main goal why Iran is doing this is that Iran is staying during last years in permanent state of emergency. Permanent state of emergency, especially after Trump came in power. And the problem from this point is that actually not Iran was that started this process, and Iran is living under pressure of US. And of course, we can see from this point that all projects, including North-South corridor, including developing infrastructure for roads from Iran to Central Asia, need just the de-escalation in general in region. And this is one of the main goals that Iran and other countries involved, not even involved in this project, but just involved in the situation in general in region, including Russia, including Saudi Arabia, including other countries of region, including India. All these countries are interested in de-escalation, although during Trump administration, it's not that easy to achieve this goal, but still, without this goal, it will be extremely difficult to develop any project in Iran and to develop any project for Iran itself. And we see that actually Iran is interested in de-escalation. We saw it during Rouhani period that Iranian society have a request for de-escalation and Iranian authorities have a request for de-escalation. But to the point that we have now, it didn't succeed. And also, I think that all countries in the region and the countries involved in projects around Iran shall work on this goal. That's all for now.
Nikita, thanks a lot. And I would like to ask you about Iranian expectation for the US elections. Which is the less evil for Iran? Is it Joe Biden or Donald Trump? As far as from Joe Biden, we have heard about possible de-escalation of the situation in Iran, or is it just electoral promises? So what are the preferred? What is the preferred partner for Iran?
Well, I think from Iranian perspective, no doubt that Biden is much better than Trump, because Trump we can say that we have almost no chance for de-escalation if Trump will be re-elected, or at least very little chance of de-escalating. And although Biden and his advisors said that they're supporting nuclear deal, and it is possible that Biden will come back to nuclear deal and lift sanctions. Although, of course, officially, Iranian officials says that they don't care about who will win in the elections, but actually, I think that no doubt that Biden is more preferable. From other point, we can see also, of course, we can't say that the win of Biden will automatically lead to de-escalation in region. Of course, there will be much more work, and of course, Biden will have a lot of points, a lot of moments when he can stop this process. So it will be still a complicated issue, but then it is possible. But with Trump, I think it's not.
Okay, Nikita, thanks a lot for your presentation, and later we will come back during questions and answers session. And now our next speaker should be Zohreh, but I see that she's currently not with us because internet is not very stable. And Your Excellency, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, could you be so kind to be the next speaker, please?
Thank you, Dr. Anna.
Thanks.
At the outset, I would like to convey my gratitude to Tillotoma Foundation for organizing this and inviting me. It is indeed a great pleasure to join this August panel to discuss this very important issue of connectivity that is so very essential to our very existence. And Iran, due to its strategic location and historic and civilizational links, has been a natural choice for India. Geopolitics and geoeconomics also define and dictate the course one navigates, since at the bottom of any international enterprise is the national interest of a country. And we are not immune from that. Iran follows a policy that it feels befitting to its interests, and India, like any other country, looks at its own from its own national interest prism. Yet the beauty of an older relationship is you appreciate each other's concerns, potential and limitations, and then try to find a modus vivendi in the interim. We are also doing that. So what we have heard quite a lot from my esteemed panelists before about the problems that one is facing in today's world and how INSTC has progressed. But for personally, For me, this INSTC has a greater personal importance because I used to be in Moscow in 2000 when it was signed during the visit of our Prime Minister. Then we have, what I would like to see is just look at a little bit about in the allotted time, about the scenario that is emerging in the region that will have a direct impact on any major issues or any major enterprise that can go forward or will not go forward. And then I would like to briefly touch upon the Indo-Iranian relations and still rather more briefly on the current status of the INSTC. Of course, we are all in it. It started with 3 countries, then it became 4, then now I think 14, 15 countries are there in the region. It has emerged as a major, INSTC has emerged as a major rallying point for a large number of countries. And of course, there is a competition from the BRI now, from China itself, its entry into the Middle East, and especially now with Iran. So all these things are playing out. Now, as far as we know, that you need to understand about the Iranian dilemmas and its regional positions, because geography leads to geopolitics, and especially in the case of Iran. Now, we know, I remember this at one of the meetings, one of the deputy foreign ministers said it very eloquently about the location of Iran. He said that Iran is at the heart of at least 5 regions, and connecting these regions together without being a part of those sub-regions. Iran is neighboring the Arab world, but it is not Arab. Iran is a neighboring Central Asia, but it is not a Central Asian nation. Iran is neighboring the Caucasus, but it is not a Caucasian nation. Iran is a neighbor to the Eastern Mediterranean countries and Turkey, but it is not a Mediterranean country. Iran is bordering the Indian subcontinent, but it is not a subcontinental country. So the logic of geography and geopolitics determines how Iran is going to affect, because Iran's problems in the region are manifold. Its problems are not only within, because of its political system that it follows, but also with its neighbors, especially the rivalry with Saudi and the Arab Sunni states that has taken it to a point where there is a conflict is permanently present for decades and centuries now. So we have to really look at it from the point of view that the international events like the collapse of the Soviet Union or the Taliban in Afghanistan, or for that matter, the onset of President Trump, all these have a great impact on how Iran is going to behave. Whether it obviously prioritizes its economic and its survival instincts and survival interests, because that is extremely important for it. It is an important power in the region, and it is trying to move forward. On the other hand, it is also directly or indirectly involved in various conflicts in the region, whether it is in Yemen, Syria, or Lebanon. It has, again, now in the Gulf itself, we have so many hotspots where the 2 opposing sides will have to take opposing viewpoints. And this is a mutually destructive syndrome, which is decimating the whole of the West Asia, in my view, especially the Gulf states and Iran, and which is having a very direct impact on India, because India is an extended neighbor of all these countries and has a centuries-old relationships with them. Now, of course, we do not agree that the USA should have withdrawn from the JCPOA, because that is something that has destabilized all the project plans, whether in the INSTC or bilateral engagements between various countries. Now, USA under Trump has actually tried to just use his maximum pressure tactics that have brought Russia and China closer, and both of them into a race, rather than a marathon, but a 100-meter race to somehow acquire that strategic space in the Middle East. It is the return. On the other hand, all the countries are facing the major problem of terrorism, which is all over. So therefore, I feel that there is a very major issue that are going on, and I do not see any. Only yesterday you must have seen that last week, that the UAE has decided to have a rapprochement with Israel, and they are going to have development relationships, so the Palestinian angle will open. Today, Iran and Turkey are the 2 major protagonists for Palestine, as against the various Gulf countries. So we do not see any sign of abating of the reduction in the violence around the region. On top of it, now, apart from the US's disruptive policy in the region, It is also whether it is to protect Israel or whether to protect its own interest or just a haphazard or no plan of action, or there is a method in madness of Trump, as people say. So we need to have continuously look at exactly how this is going to play out. And of course, India has been affected a great deal because Iran used to be our second largest supplier of oil. We had to reduce it completely because the Indian companies were being subjected to various sanctions. We tried to get the waivers with them. So because without money, nothing will go and the trade will not happen. And as such, under the COVID-19, the global trade, global recession, economic recession is taking its toll. So in the near future, I do not see that we are going to have any major problem. Even the INST Coordination Council meeting that was supposed to be held this month, I think in Baku, has been postponed for the 9th one. The 8th one was held in Tehran, which was quite, several decisions were taken. And so I feel that we need to keep track of exactly how this works out. And if Biden comes to power, perhaps he will make a rethink, although I agree with my predecessor that we do not see a great change in the US policy, but definitely the policy will be tempered and there will be a greater space. If the greater space is for China, because today we are seeing all the countries that are sanctioned by, whether it is China, whether it is Russia, whether it is Iran, or any other country for that matter, are all forced to align themselves. So there are new regimes and new power balances and equations are emerging, which I call cryptic in a way. Cryptic is C for China, R for Russia, I for Iran, and T for Turkey, P for Pakistan, and Q for Qatar. Now, this is something that is emerging, a new one, which will have its own challenges, as we are seeing the Israel and the Arab Gulf states going into another direction. So this has to be also, I think the countries will have to look at it when you are making your strategic decisions about this particular angle. As far as India and Iran are concerned, frankly, I would say that our relations have been historic, civilizational, but they are also marked by trials, tribulations, and tensions during the millennia, and it is natural for any relationship. But as you may be aware that until 1947, we used to share a border until Pakistan was made. And there were several common features of language, culture, history in our countries, and therefore they are also connected by energy, culture, and people. These are the many things that bring us together, and we continue to be that. In 1950, first treaty that we had signed was friendship. And this was supposed to be the perpetual peace and friendship between the two countries. And this continued. But then at that time, they were supporting the Iranians were supporting the US, and therefore they were on the other side of the spectrum. And so we had this off and on that continued between the two countries. Several high-level visits have taken place between the two countries at every time. The one that started really the things got going was one of the visits by former Prime Minister Vajpayee when he went to Tehran in April 2001, and when we signed this Tehran Declaration. And we set forth the areas of various collaborations and cooperation. Then Khatami visited India in 2003 and was the chief guest of our Republic Day, which is one of the biggest honors that we confer on our visiting dignitaries. Every single Prime Minister of India has visited Iran, and so have they. Now, one of the key developments that this current government, Indian government, and I'm no longer with the government, is that they try to get great focus on West Asia, including. So in 2016, Narendra Modi, the current Prime Minister, visited Tehran. And during that visit, he also had a meeting with the Afghan president. A trilateral agreement was signed, and it was decided that the transit and transport will be done for the three countries together, so that we have an access through Afghanistan and Iran to Central Asia and onwards in the instant. Now, President Rouhani came in that meeting. Actually, 12 agreements were signed, and when President Rouhani followed the visit in 2018, this was again a very high-level delegation, and 13 agreements were signed during that. So within a span of just 2.5 years, you have 25 agreements between the two countries that were signed. And it was also the time when JCPOA was signed and Iran was looking forward to, but at the same time, then the US sanctions came in and they put together. And during Rouhani's visit, actually, the interim operation of Chabahar port and the airport was signed during that period. So India has been, but the two joint statements And coming to the topic of theme of this topic is, of this conference is that the connectivity was in both the statements that were issued during Modi's visit and during the Rouhani's visit. And it says, first one was towards prosperity through greater connectivity. The other one was civilizational connect and contemporary context. So you see, they understand, but then we have little problem, and therefore sanctions regime and non-import of the oil, virtual zero imports of the oil under pressure from the US. Although the Chabahar port has been given a waiver because of Afghanistan, and India has been using that port for supplying various things. But in the meantime, you have problems that have come across from the other side. Now, China has become extremely active in the region, and China is also virtually at virtual war with the United States. And we don't know which way it will go before the November. But at the same time, that you must have heard about this comprehensive strategic partnership that is being discussed since 2016 during the visit of Xi Jinping to Tehran. And during that, they are looking at not only the BRI investments, but also the investments into security sector and other sectors in the region. And China has already developed Gwadar port, and it considers it as its military port. From our point of view, Chabahar was supposed to be a strategic port for India, but we do not know now, because Iranian sometimes statements come out and which say that, okay, China and Pakistan both are welcome to that port. So therefore, the strategic aspect of this port, but at the same time, this is also equally important for us from our perspective of moving towards the Central Asia and to the rest of the world. And also, if INSTC works out well, it has been a lot of countries, a lot of corridors which can be connected, and they are all looking towards it. That somehow, one of my friends said that Russia it's no longer a priority for Russia, but I would go by the official statement in November, in 2019, we signed an MOU where we discussed with the Russians, and they agreed to expedite the part of their part and to activation of it as a major conduit for trade. Of course, the Baltics or various other areas where we can connect them if it works out. Of course, as mentioned by other people, there are many hitches, many glitches. But this also, everything does not depend on these 3, 4, 5, or 10 countries. It depends on the global scenario, because if we have to export to Europe, then it needs to get out of the sanction regimes. That is very important, which is currently throttling the total this thing. But I'm very hopeful that, of course, when the next meeting is held, the basic now coordination council, they will address many issues. India has been operating the Chabahar port. An Indian company has been given the right to do that. There was a problem which was mentioned about Zahedan to Chabahar port railway line issue. But that, I believe, that both sides have tried to underplay. But in my view, I think that India should have taken the lead at that time and tried to finish it as fast as possible, or even now, if it is exempt from the sanctions regime, we must provide whatever commitments India had made. So that is absolutely necessary. I believe that now at the leadership level in all the countries, there is an agreement, not only on the INSTC, but to closely coordinate the various developments that are taking place. India had recently been providing assistance to Iran. We need to find exactly the new ways of doing business with various countries, because I must say that this protectionist regime is going to continue. This is increasingly protectionist now. As the Western countries are closing their borders, creating more problems. So we are going to have those problems. We need to work out something. If the unilateral sanctions is going to be the order of the day, then it is important that we work out some currency exchange mechanisms, like the Europeans have been trying to do stacks, or rupee real trade, or rupee ruble trade, or even within the context of our BRICS bank or something like that. We need to work out a situation, a barter trade. We need to find ways where we can invest in each of those countries and try to get over. And we must create some special purpose vehicles that should be immune, because see, the big companies that are operating globally naturally get subjected to a certain BRICS, the Bretton Woods institutions that are prevailing, where USA is the lead owner of this thing. So we need to be more innovative and try to work together in these and open up things, right? Because see, glitches are there, they are not our doing. The glitches are the whatever is happening between China and USA, that is also impacting the whole world. It is taking, it has impacted our trade, it has impacted our economies. The COVID-19 has created a paralysis in all the economies of the world. Sanctions regime adds to that much more. And I do not see an immediate respite to this kind of a situation. But at the same time, the corridors, many corridors are coming. I don't know how the BRI will play out eventually. Although China has a lot of money, but how much money can it have? That is something that it will have to also rationalize. It's because they are being termed as hegemonistic and debt trap kind of things, which are creating problems for the countries that are receiving those kind of. So I believe that I would close now, and I'll say any questions there. But I would like to say it is an important project, and all sides must work on it. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Your Excellency, for the in-depth picture of the current situation. And as for the steps to be done, how do you think, maybe would India be interested in some track 2 diplomacy below the radar talks of the countries of North-South trade corridor with Iran, somehow to try to improve economic relations?
Well, as you know that we do have, number one, in the context of INSTC, we have a coordination council, which is with the headquarters of this INSTC secretariat is in Tehran. And I think their meeting is slated for in Baku. And they are going to discuss on this because see that for the trade, even though the time taken is reduced by 10 to 50 days, or the cost is 40% less. So it is obviously attractive from our point of view. And we are also, I mean, with Russia, as you know, that we are also looking at the Far Eastern side. So I think that we need to get together. I mean, India, and now we will be having this year the summit meeting between President Putin and Prime Minister Vajpayee. And with our Iranian colleagues, we recently had our joint commission meeting. So all these things are being issued. The problem is, and they are being discussed. The problem is that the largest economy, two largest economies of the world today are at loggerheads. And then that is combined by a worse impact by the COVID-19. So I think even if all the countries, all economies are in the negative, everybody is in a complete recession. So I foresee that the investments might be reduced somewhat, but the planning has to be done right now as to what are which are the missing links that need to be contained. And I'm sure we have a rupee real agreement with Iran, and we do have with ruble agreement with the Russians, and with the Central Asia countries, we have a separate block. I think it is a good idea that we need to talk, and I believe that there is something under a discussion on this particular aspect. Besides, we are also members in SCO, all of us. So, but the problem between India and China is also playing out at the moment, because we do not know if Chabahar, which was supposed to be a strategic port for us, and if it gets combined with Gwadar or with the Chinese ambitions, then obviously it may have its own impact on us.
Thanks a lot, Your Excellency. And now I would like to proceed to our next speaker. It's Zohreh Khanmohammadi from Tehran. Zohreh, can you hear us? Nice to see you. Please turn on your microphone. Yes.
Hello, how are you? I'm so glad to meet you here and so glad to resolve the problem, internet connection. Unfortunately, I had connect internet and finally solved it. In the name of God who created man and gave him power of thinking to prevent war and conflict, and instead brings peace and calm. Dear colleagues from Russia and India, you know we live in the world that, in my opinion, is facing with new changes by states. States, especially ones, claim hegemony, and these changes are declining the world toward a unilateralism, which leads to complexity and fracture of international relations. In this situation, what's the role of other states? With this introduction, I wanted to speak about Russia and Iran relations as two powers in international and regional level, which can play important role in contemporary era in transition world. Just I hope to have no problem in internet connection and I handle the time duration to present crucial and important points about topic. Okay, first of all, I wanted to speak about dynamics of Russia-Iran relations and West Asian politics, and then I will explain about Russia's trade routes through Iran. Dynamics of Russia-Iran relations and West Asian politics. As you know, Iran-Russia relations backs to Safavid era in 1521 a year in Iran and continues to the states. This relation has been accompanied by several ups and downs, but it still continues. What reason? I think some reason and are so important are this: neighborhood of the two countries, model of international system after collapse of SSR, common threats like extremism, Iran's geopolitical position. I try to give a brief explanation of each case. The first one is that the only border between Iran and Russia is the Caspian Sea. But Iran has common land border with Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, which includes Russia's near abroad. And also these are independent states, but are acting environment for Moscow. So this region from Moscow's lens are sensitive and crucial, and Iran can help Russia to maintain near abroad from any threats. Second case is that after collapse of SSR and disappearance of the bipolar system, Russia faced with new entity in international system, which was not polar of the new system. But Russia got new opportunity in that time. What that? It was actually Russia got new opportunity in that time. It was Iran's revolution, and which opposed revolutionary regime or system that opposed with American hegemonic system. So this cooperation although based on national interests, both countries, Iran and Russia, has caused the relations between two countries to continuous to the states. Actually, this reason is so important in this period of time due to United States behaviors in international arena, especially toward triangle Russia, Iran, and China, which are absolute threats for him, means United States. Third reason is related to common threats like extremism. About common threats, I have to say that
Zohreh, I'm sorry, we can't hear you. Maybe you could turn off the video so we have only audio then. Mm-hmm. Zohreh, can you hear us?
I think she's no longer in the meeting. She is rejected.
Right. I'm sorry, Soham.
No, it's okay. She is rejected.
Ah. Zohreh, you are with us? Yes? Oh, yes, it's okay now.
No, I'm here. Listen me. Hear
Yes,
me?
yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Hear me? Are you okay?
Yes,
Yes,
Zohreh,
yes.
we can
Please
hear you.
continue.
Okay. Okay. Excuse me. It's rooted in first scales, which mentioned above, neighboring of two countries. Of course, it's one side, and as I said, Iran's common border with some countries, which extremism is present here. So this cooperation between two sides, Iran and Russia, is necessary, aimed at ensuring, mentioning that fighting against terrorism and extremism was one of the more important reasons for close cooperation between Iran.
Zohreh, yes, we can see you now. Can you hear us?
In the Syria.
Okay.
Hear me?
Yes, but it's not very audible. Please proceed, okay?
Excuse me, Dr. Velikaya here.
Yes, we can hear you, but with some interruptions. It's not very audible. But could you please proceed? Maybe it will be normalized.
No.
Okay.
I have no idea from you. Please, you continue your session.
We can hear you. Can you please continue? Ms. Zohreh, can you please continue? We can hear you. Please continue. We can hear you clearly. You can continue.
بفرمي خانم بفرمي.
Zohreh, can you hear us? Maybe now it's normalized. Maybe without video it would be better, so that we can see you now. Zohreh, we can see you now. Maybe you could proceed.
Dr. Velikaya, excuse me, you have my video or hear me?
Yes, we can see you and we can hear you. Can you hear us? We hear you and we see you, Zohreh.
Unfortunately, I have no audio. I'm sorry for this problem.
Okay, dear viewers, dear speakers, I'm sorry, but these things happen nowadays. Then maybe we could proceed to our next speaker, please, Dr. Waiel Awwad. Could you be so kind? Maybe we would continue next afterwards with Zohreh's presentation.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you
Sorry.
for giving me this opportunity. I don't know if Zohreh Khanum will wanted to continue or I continue with my speech, but if I am heard, it's fine. I can continue.
Yes, yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, now it's the disadvantage that I have to speak the last speaker because most of my distinguished speaker have spoke everything. So you made it very big challenge for me. If it had been an exam, I would have been a much better to stay the last speaker. But since now it will be very difficult to find the word. But nevertheless, I would like to be little more of the issues which not been touched fully in this discussion, which is one of them is the, I call it the corridors, the diplomacy of corridors. And this issues is of a great importance because there is a strategic lack of strategic policy toward the region, which has have made it more of a regional imbalance. And this regional imbalance actually have created a kind of absence of a security framework that can bring all the Euro-Asian country together in one platform, that we can see that this project, which is usually all corridors have to go to Europe, it's a Euro-Asia connections. And it is just like 7,200 kilometers from Mumbai to St. Petersburg in Russia. So there is a long way of connectivity, whether it is on rail, whether it is on the sea, or whether it is on the by all kind of connectivity between the countries. So the absence of vision toward this region have made it more subjected to vested interest nations, namely the United States, which sees that this kind of prosperities in this region is against its own interest. Therefore, we have been subjected, and most of these countries subjected to all the sanctions and the pressures and the compulsion of the American foreign policy toward the region that had turned it out into still a project on the pipelines on the making. And I see these are the projects which has been since 2000, which have been on. We started with the INSDC, which has taken in 2000, and it has India, it has Iran, Russia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Kazakhstan, and Tajikistan, Turkey, Ukraine, Belarus, Oman, and Syria. And then we have come to the Ashgabat agreement, where also we had the Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Iran, Pakistan, India, and Oman. And then we had the Chabahar, where we had Iran, India, and Afghanistan as a major player in this project. Then there was a proposal of Russia-Pakistan corridor, which was also in 2018, but it is still. And if you really see, and then the Chinese came up with their own project, which is the BRI, One Belt Road initiatives by the current Xi Jinping, current leaders of China. So all these projects, there are four major players actually in this: is China, is India, is Iran, and is Russia. So the four countries of a different interest, a conflict of interest of the four, has not made it a very cohesive kind of a framework that can work and make this connectivity a possibility. So therefore, the interfighting and the conflict of interest and the wars on the regions, especially in the Arab and the Persian Gulfs, have made such kind of connectivity impossible practically, though there are the Asian centuries, which is led by China and led by the India, is creating a paving the way into this to be a reality. So, in my opinion, if security and stability in this part of the world is a prime important for any project to prosper. We're talking of a $1 trillion investment of the Chinese. We're talking of more than $500 billion of the India and the rest of the countries, also project which extended 7,200 kilometers to Russia with the involvement. So unless and until we create the atmosphere of security and stability, which is impossible at this stage because there are lots of interfighting, there are conflict, there are wars started, there are terrorism which is reviving in this part of the world. And the CIS country is a hub of all the gas and natural resources of oil. And unless and until we create the corridors and pave the pathway, it's impossible for this to be of any value. So therefore, you can see how things are developing on these interconnectivity. Bring me to the talk that are these countries, the will of the leaders of these prime countries are sitting together across the table to find a way out, to put a framework that they can walk together, because none of this project is separate from the other. You talk of Gwadar, you talk of Shabahar, you talk of the separate, but it's 100 kilometers different distance between the two. Supposedly they come together, then you have Iran and Pakistan at the same time. But here you are, India is against Pakistan, China and China. It's Afghanistan is the center of the quagmire. And then we are having revival of IS in Afghanistan. And now with the Taliban coming up, Iran is having a problem, but Iran is the main connection, the geopolitical strategic connection with all the countries. Countries were created to divide this part of the world, the natural extension of it. What Ambassador Anil was speaking of India, Iran, it's a natural expansion 72 years ago. 73 years ago, it was a natural expansion into the Eurasia and continue with the Caspian toward the Russia and Europe. So I feel with this kind of the agreement that have been framed, countries has to put their national interest at the prime important before they are subjected to this kind of a pressure from external forces to abandon a project that can prosper these nations. So my take on this is that we need to see that all these proposed pipelines should go ahead with it. And I don't think the United States is able to defeat a united Asia to go together into this project with Europe, because there are lots of involvement, especially at COVID-19. There are lots of economic global recessions and financial crisis. And unless and until there is a revival of such kind of infrastructures project, which is a huge potential for the region, I don't think anybody should stop the national interest of any of these members. I don't want to continue because I think we crossed the time limit of the program, but I am open for a question and answer for anything. Thank you very much, Tillotoma Foundation, for inviting me for the talk.
Dr. Waiel, thanks a lot for your wonderful speech. And how do you think the revival of this infrastructural connectivity project, would it be on the agenda of the upcoming Iran presidential elections?
I think the presidential election, it will not have much of an impact. You see, some countries have more of a national interest. What I am worried about is the creation of a more battle zone in the region, where we have seen the blowing up of the Beirut port. It has nothing to do with isolation, what's going on in West Asia, because, or in the Middle East, because bombing of that, it is on the line of the Silk Route, which is from Syria to Iraq, to Iran, to Afghanistan, and to China. So 60 countries will be at the receiving end from the United States, and Israel, which is also trying to create another alternative route from Haifa to Aqaba toward Iraq, toward Saudi Arabia, UAE, and then an alternative parallel line between India on one hand and China on the other hand, they are trying to create. So I think it's that now we are just seeing a realliance, rearrangement, more than we are seeing a clear picture of what's going to happen, because a waning influence of a superpower called the United States have created vacuums in all these parts of the world. So there are regional players who are trying to refill their position in these places, and there are emerging powers which is also seeing their interest. And I think India, as an emerging power, can take the lead in this part of the world to stabilize it more than any other country because it has good relation with all. So Iran, Afghanistan, the regional player, and stability in this part of the world is a prime important for all the players.
Dr. Waiel, thanks a lot for your presentation. And we will also discuss these questions during our upcoming session. And now you're not our last speaker, we have one more speaker. It's Mr. Soham Das, Director of Tillotoma Foundation. So Soham, the floor is yours. Dr. Waiel, thanks a lot for your presentation.
I think before I begin, I must give Ms. Zohreh one more chance to make her points. Ms. Zohreh, if you're there, please. Required, you know, I can yield my time to her, it doesn't matter, but we have, you know. Please continue.
Thank you for the time that you give me. Really, I'm so confused to present any lecture. Just for the final about Russia's trade routes through Iran. At a glance, we can say there are several corridors around and through Iran, in which some are active and other is not.
Please continue.
That's one of the countries succumbed to the American pressure of internet connectivity.
I'm out again, yes.
Please continue. Yes, now you're in. Please continue.
Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please continue.
International North-South Transport Corridor. That is one of the most trade routes between two. That addition, Russia and Iran, India, is that connection between India and Russia made by this corridor through India, ocean, and Iran's land and could land. I'm so worried for the connection. Hear me again.
Yes, yes, I can hear you. Please continue.
Hear me?
Yes, yes, I can. Please continue.
Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please continue.
Yes. And realize me. Some analysts, but just I wanted to say that North-South corridor is a paper corridor because it's signed, nothing is found. It seems that states without considering its advantage, are not interested in activating the corridor. Because Russia, India, and Iran, without considering one technical point, signed the actually agreements. I think it is really that trade volume between Russia and India and its maritime path. The Russia and India are not Russia and India are not so interested in activating the corridor. I'm so sorry because I'm so confused. In the at last, I just want one point to emphasize that say Iran and Russia as important actors in contemporary world needs to each other in order to confront with US unilateralism and then realize the interests of their nations. So political and economic cooperation are necessary for continuation of relations. With regards and sorry for the problems.
Thank you so much, Ms. Khanmohammadi. I understand it's absolutely fine. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for your speech. Thank you so much. Now, I would like, in the short time that I have, I would like to make a few comments. Okay, so I think the fundamental, one of the ideas behind this conference was, I think, is we understand the importance of Iran in sort of connecting as a major area of connection between the routes from India or the entire South Asia to Central Asia and beyond to Russia. So I think in this regard, I think one important point that comes up in all the agreements is multimodal transport. Now, the reason it is called multimodal transport is there is waterways and there is also, you know, the airways, there are railways. For instance, if you look at how we are trying to reach Afghanistan through the Chabahar port. So if we think of the ships going from Mumbai to the Chabahar port, that's a waterway. From Chabahar port, you know, there's the talk of a railway project being made from Chabahar to Zahedan. Zahedan is a border city in Iran, which is near the border with Afghanistan. And so it is then through railways till there, and from there on roadways. So there is a multiple modes that are involved in the entire movement of trade that is there. Now, we know that it is very important that, you know, Afghanistan is a landlocked country and needs an access to the open seas. In fact, in the second preambulatory clause of the trilateral agreement between India, Iran, and Afghanistan on establishment of international transport and transit corridor that was signed in 2016, this is clearly written that Afghanistan is a landlocked country and needs an access to the open seas. One of the major causes why this agreement was signed and why, you know, the reasons behind this agreement. Now, we know that Iran is a depository state and the place of permanent secretariat of this agreement. Now let us look at, you know, the Article 2, Clause 1 of this trilateral agreement tells us the competent authorities for the implementation of the agreement. Now from Iran, it is Ministry of Roads and Urban Development. From Afghanistan, it is Ministry of Transport and Civil Aviation. And from India, it is Ministry of External Affairs. Now, Article 1, I just want to highlight that, you know, in the Article 1 of the trilateral agreement between India, Iran, and Afghanistan on establishment of international transport and transit corridor, provides the definition of a dry port. Now, why I feel it is important to note is because later in that same trilateral agreement, in Article 4, Clause 3, it is said that dry ports of any contracting party located in the designated transport corridors shall be considered as the origin or destination points. Now, the definition that has been provided of a dry port is is as follows: is an inland location as a logistics center connected to one or more modes of transport for the handling, storage, and regulatory inspection of goods moving in international trade and the execution of applicable customs, control, and formalities. So this is the definition of a dry port as mentioned in the trilateral agreement. Now, the final preambulatory clause of this trilateral agreement also mentions the previous memorandum of understanding signed between the three countries, Afghanistan, Iran, and India, on development of transport infrastructure in January 2003. Okay, so I think, in some of the responses, to the questions that were asked on the floor of the Indian Parliament, the Indian Minister of External Affairs has responded that this is, I think, in early 2020, the last one that I have, India is participating in the development of the first phase of the Shahid Beheshti port in Chabahar in cooperation with the government of Islamic Republic of Iran. The Indian company India Ports Global Limited has taken over port operations in December 2018 and has successfully handled over 5 lakh tons of cargo. This includes export from Afghanistan through Chabahar port, which began in February 2019. The US has shown, and this is the MEA saying, the US has shown understanding of the importance of Chabahar port operations for continued humanitarian supplies to Afghanistan and to provide Afghanistan with economic alternatives. Now, I find this line in several of the responses that the Minister of External Affairs has given in the floor of the Parliament, where it has said that the US has shown understanding of the importance of the Chabahar port operations for continued humanitarian supplies to Afghanistan and to provide Afghanistan with economic alternatives. Okay, now, as has been referred by other speakers before me, that, the President of Islamic Republic of Iran, Dr. Hassan Rouhani, visited India in February 2018. Now, in clause 5 of that joint statement, basically the two sides recognized the unique role of Iran and India in promoting multimodal connectivity within and across the region. Now, the Iranian side also expressed its readiness to enhance enabling environment to attract Indian private or public sector investments in the Chabahar Free Trade Zone. This is as per clause 10. Now, on that same occasion, the two leaders, Hassan Rouhani and Narendra Modi, released a joint postage stamp depicting the Deen Dayal Port Kandla and Shahid Beheshti terminal in Chabahar that reflected the enhanced prosperity through greater connectivity. Now, we know that India joined the United Nations TIR Convention, a very important convention for international transportation, in 2017 and Ashgabat Agreement in 2018. Now, India's accession to TIR Convention and Ashgabat Agreement was welcomed as additional steps at enhancing regional connectivity and linking regional centers of economic growth by Iran, again in clause 8 of India-Iran joint statement. In that same clause, both sides also reiterated their commitment to international north-south transport corridor and stressed on the need for inclusion of Chabahar within its framework. I think India-Iran also agreed to, in that, this is according to clause 11, that India and Iran agreed to move beyond traditional buyer-seller relationship and develop it into a long-term strategic partnership. And this is regarding energy. Regarding energy, they want to move beyond traditional buyer-seller relationship and develop it into a strategic partnership. Both sides also agreed to continue and increase the pace of negotiation for reaching appropriate results on energy cooperation, including the Farzad B gas field. We know that Iran faced a lot of financial sort of sanctions from the West, and India, there has been Indian negotiations with Iran in this regard. There has been some agreements, including the Rupee Rial agreement. So in this regard, both India and Iran recognize the need to put in place an effective banking channel for business transactions. This is as per clause 12 of the India-Iran joint statement in 2018. In the same clause, the two states also agreed to set up a joint committee of officials to examine feasible options, including Rupee Rial arrangement, Asian Clearing Union mechanism to establish functional payment channels. Now, of course, we know that there has been in recent times some discussion and some debate in the public forum whether India is still in that railway project, and I would end with this, that in the railway project from Chabahar to Zahedan, all the MEA has denied that it is not being included anymore. Now, we know from India it was ARCON, IRCON, and from Iran it was CDTIC. That was the two agencies that were in conversation for the development of the Chabahar Zahedan railway line. So it is to be seen what happens in the future. But I think, the importance of sort of Iran as a major connecting point between India and the South Asia and the Central Asian countries like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and these countries as we go for, in 2012 we launched the Connect Central Asia policy. So when we go for further developing those policies, I think this connectivity, this line of transportation is very important. So thank you.
Okay, Dr. Soham, at first I would like to thank our colleague Zohreh from Tehran for her courage to be with us regardless of all these technical problems and for giving her perspective on Eurasian connectivity projects and on Iran-Russia strategic partnership. And also I like to ask Soham, do you think that Central Asia is a golden gate for Iran? Would you agree?
Yeah, I think you see one point that needs to be looked at. That I think there is an overall thing that there is the overall Asian and sort of cooperation and engagement against the West, or like an alternate approach here. So all the non-Western countries in Asia, whether it is the Central Asian countries, Iran, and it's Iran's relationship with India. Now you see Iran's relationship with India and with China, who are themselves sort of adversaries or sort of in a competition. And so this is in fact is very interesting. I think both whether it is Iran, whether it is India, everybody wants to reach Central Asia, because you see there's a major problem in reaching, whether it's from Iran or whether it is from India. You have the sort of unstable Afghanistan in between when you want to reach Central Asia. So everybody's, I think, its objective is to have better connectivity with Central Asia, so that you can have more energy from Central Asia, you can have more trade with them. Your options are diversified basically.
Thanks a lot to all our distinguished experts and to our last speaker, Soham. And now we would like to proceed towards question and answers session. And we have the question from our viewer. It sounds like, owing to US embargo to Iran, India hasn't been able to invest more in Iran, leading Iran more closer to China. Chabahar port is close to Gwadar port, and China has invested a lot in Gwadar port as part of CPEC. My question is, how does new Iran-China equation will impact the future of Chabahar port? So I would like to ask our esteemed panelists to answer it. So the final question is, how does new Iran-China equation will impact the future of Chabahar port? Yes, Nikita, you're on the screen, so would you answer, please?
Yeah, I want to just, in general, to talk about the question about the competition that we see being competition of China and India in Iran. I don't think that in nearest perspective it will influence greatly the Chabahar port. I mean that Iranians are welcoming all investments from all countries, from all the world. They usually say that we don't welcome only Israeli investments from Israel. That's it. So anyway, wherever China will play a more important role in Iran, and China want to play a more important role in Iran, to invest in Iran, anyway, Iranians will be always interested in balancing Chinese investments, and that's why if Indians will find a way to invest to Iran during the sanctions, or even if sanctions will be lifted, it will be just up to India. India can invest to Iran, and in Iran it will always welcome it, because Iran don't want to be just the country that had a great influence of China. Iran always want to balance investments, always want to balance foreign influence in its country. That's why not even India, even countries, Western countries, and Russia, and some other countries have a chance to develop its project in Iran, and Iran always will be welcome it. So this is my way to explain. Thank you.
Dr. Anna, I just wanted to inform you that Dr. Awwad had to leave for an engagement he is in
Dr. Waiel, thanks a lot for being with us and glad to hear your wonderful speech. Hoping to stay in touch. Thanks a lot. Okay, Soham, thanks. And would our other speakers like to answer the question? Your Excellency, yes, you would like to? I'm sorry, there is no audio. We can't hear you. Yes, thanks.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yes, now it's okay.
Yeah, all right. No, I fully agree with Nikita about this, that Iran would like to see a balance between China and someone else, whether India or some other countries. The thing is that we are talking about two parallel projects, like the BRI as well as the Chabahar port, INSTC. These two projects, and Iran happens to be one of the central countries in both. If the situation between India and China was a little more palatable at the moment, now as you know, it's a conflict-ridden situation, borders, and there is a competition and cooperation policy that goes on between two. So definitely the way this has happened at the same time, as you know, the China-Iran strategic partnership agreement that's coming about, and India's current inability to invest heavily into the project because of the US sanctions. I think that everybody is buying the time, for biding the time for till such time that the US elections are decided, and whether China continues in the same way. If, of course, as he says, that Iran does not wish to be invested, I mean, if China is saying, one has read about $400 billion investments in Iran. Well, that's a huge amount of an investment in Iran alone. So therefore, one does not know. Secondly, it is not China which we perceive in the context of Iran alone. We perceive China in the context of Pakistan. And as you know, China, Pakistan, that corridor which is going through Gwadar and others, that also has a game there for us. So we'll have to, I mean, in my view, the Indians will be watching it carefully. They are committed to this project, of course, because it takes us to Europe direct by the shortest route. It is the most viable mode of trading with the Western world. So I'm sure, and Europeans, everybody has shown a lot of promise in this. There is a possible connectivity to Baltics and to other various corridors all over. So we'll do that. But as far as this question is concerned, I think that it'll depend, time will only tell that how China-Iran equation moves on and how Pakistan fits into that.
Dr. Velikaya,
thanks a lot.
Yeah, I think we have Professor Bhutani with us. He's our distribution advisor. I think we can take a comment from him. If he wants to make a comment. Please unmute yourself.
Is it all right now?
Yes, it's all right.
Yes. I'm sorry, I just would like to thank His Excellency Ambassador Anil Trigunayat. He has to leave now. So thanks a lot, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
It was the honor for us.
Hope to have you soon again.
Well, first of all, здравствуйте to my Russian friends. It's wonderful to listen.
Добрый день, здравствуйте.
Okay. Желаю вам больших успехов. Вы не только красивая девушка, але умная девушка тоже.
Спасибо огромное. Спасибо.
Okay. No, subject was very interesting, and we found many point of views, and I was very happy to see my old friend, that Syrian journalist, Dr. I have forgotten his name even now, Awwad, because I didn't meet him for 20 years, you know. But he was very articulate, and he gave a good point of view. But what I'm going to say is slightly offend few people. I wish if India had played its cards more properly. Instead of, it would have been much better if India had joined with China on this project, you know. In the long run, a friendship between the two Asian countries is more important than anything else, you know. If Americans are undependable and untrustworthy, I will not call them friends, because they are totally capitalist. If they see there is not much money, they change their horses. So if we had played our cards more carefully, we would not have been in such a precarious position as we are, because we have lost Iran friendship thanks to the Americans. We are not sure how long the Saudis will play ball with us. And we have a permanent enemy, Pakistan. So in that circumstances, Chinese role could have been much more useful for India. If India has gone out of its way to shake hands with China, I mean, to maintain a permanent hostility with China when that country has become economically a superpower and militarily 5 times bigger than India. So this is my one point. And second is, I mean, it is not compared to my Russian friends. Russians are playing their cards very cautiously, rather close to their chest. They are trying to diffuse the situation where it is possible, you know. But if Americans are determined to create more and more conflict, even Russians have become a bit quiet. I'm very happy that Russia played a very important role to diffuse tension between India and China. And we expect that India should rely more on Russia, you know. After all, Americans are not going to give anything free to India, you know. In this world, you will have to pay the price. So these are the 2 points I have made. I think I have provoked you enough to comment.
Dr. Awwad, you can comment.
Yes, dear Professor, thanks a lot for your wonderful critical thinking of the scholar. We needed a lot this day, and thanks for this academic perspective. Thanks a lot.
Большое вам спасибо.
Привет из Москвы огромный. And also, I would like to ask all our speakers and viewers who would like to ask, how do you think, what is the nearest and the long-term perspective on India-Iran relations?
Shall I answer or someone else will answer?
Yes, could you start, please, Professor?
I think we have almost lost out in Iran, thanks to the Americans. And they don't want that India and Iran should become 2 pillars of strength in Asia. So they have succeeded in cutting out the ties, the emerging ties between Iran and India. And today, India doesn't have enough money to invest in Iran. So China has immediately got an opportunity to give goodies to Iran. And but Iranians should remember one thing, that after, since they are the biggest Shia country, India is the only country where Shias are safe after Iran, you know. Unlike Pakistan, where Shias are being murdered every now and then, we in this country keep our Shia population in a relatively in a good condition, and they feel very safe, and they are allowed to take out their procession. Not these days, but on Muharram, there is no kind of pressure on them. So this Iran has to also realize when it moves towards China that it should not break all its bridges with India. After all, the understanding between India and Iran is almost 30 years old.
Thanks a lot. And
I think I can make a little
yes,
observation. Sorry, I have
Yes.
to leave because of some other engagement, but I'm back with you on air. And can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Awwad.
Okay. Anna, thank you. And I'm listening to Professor Bhutanis, and I'm fully in agreement with his point of view, because it is very disturbing to see that the people lose their national interest because of the compulsion of the new realignment that had been drawn. And maybe we can see that the camps have been shifted a bit away from its main direction in this part of the world. So I think, but in terms of civilization, I always come back to the culture and civilization between nations, and India, Russia, China, and Iran. I think they can understand the deep-rooted connection between them to come back and defeat this kind of pressures and see where their interest lies. And without taking in consideration the geopolitical importance of this kind of relation and building the bridges with Europe and the Central Asian states, I think it will be impossible for any of these countries to prosper depending on the American dictate and where could be, because America, unfortunately, is the only beneficiary is the arm industry. And the arm industry looking for new battle zones. And the more you create battle zones, the more they are benefited. So therefore, if we don't have the visions of the future of Asian century, I think we are lacking behind, and I think that's my take on this.
Thanks a lot. It's what about US diplomat George Frost Cannon was writing 50 years about the nation of camp followers, about the interests of military corporations. And Dr. Awwad, we have a personal question for you from the, thanks a lot for your answer. And also we have personal question for you from a member of Tillotoma Foundation. It sounds, how will India prevent cutting off its oil imports from Iran under mounting pressure from the US? What are the options available for India?
I think I always raise this question to the Indian former foreign secretary when it was Myanmar and India comparing it with Iran, where India did not fall to the pressure of US on Myanmar. They continue there because they said that's our national interest. But here you are, you have two countries adversary to Iran is United States and Israel, where they are putting lots of pressure on any countries that they are trying to come close to Iran, including India. So I feel that India has to make its own decision. And I'm sure, despite the fact that they have cut into the oil import from Iran, there is no way that they can break this bond. No way, because the link between the two is too strong. And I think they can find many alternative routes. But I believe the current circumstances with the Indian government is unable to take the leadership in Asia and in this particular course because of so many other compulsions. I don't see in the near future, short-term gain, any of these countries can gain. If the United States tomorrow, Biden comes and he come back to the nuclear deal, yes, India can reapproach with Iran. That's why they kept the doors open. They did not keep all the doors closed between them. So I think the backdoor diplomacy, the softness, and the criticism against each other also has played a major role in keeping the flow of the relation despite the American pressures.
Yes, thanks a lot. And thanks a lot for your answer. And also, I can see that my colleague from IMEMO, Stanislav Pritchin, and also from Chatham House, he would like to comment something from our previous questions.
Thanks a lot, Anna. I would like to say 2 words about my vision of perspective, possible scenario of development situation around Iran. In case of the North-South corridor will be completed next year, it will be really breakthrough for cooperation in the region, because we will have the full-fledged integrated transport route, which automatically could transport a lot of goods, even in case of sanctions against Iran. So transit trade, this is not a real transaction. This is just going goods through territory of Iran. And in case of when these roads through Iran is the shortest one and the cheapest one, in this case, automatically producers of goods would choose this direction for export through Iran. And this fact will really help Iran to use its infrastructure for developing cooperation with countries, even in case of sanctions. So we can see here that development, positive development now completely depends on readiness of Iran to complete its part of duty within the North-South corridor. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Some other comments from our experts?
If you don't mind, I want to comment on the perspective on Iranian-Indian relations. We can see that in the nearest future, we've seen this, that American pressure influenced the relations, Indian-Iranian relations greatly, especially in economical sphere. And in nearest future, while the sanctions are still in power, it seems like there is no opportunity for real development, a real breakthrough here. But then I think sooner or later sanctions will be lifted, or there will be found some new ways of investment in Iran. And I think after that, India will have maybe even more opportunities to invest, to influence the situation in Iran, and to develop its economical projects in Iran than it had several years ago when sanctions were lifted during Obama era. Because, if we just imagine that sanctions will be lifted after Biden will win, if Biden will win, then still Western companies are not gonna be really interested in Iran there, because they will be still afraid of sanctions that will come in power after, because they've seen it this time after Obama lifted sanctions and many countries made investments in Iran. Then another president came and all of this progress was ruined, and many companies lost their money. So I think Western companies are much more sensitive to these points than Indians. So I think that in long-term perspective, India have a lot of opportunities in Iran, and especially with the thing that I've mentioned already, that Iran will be always interested in balancing Chinese investments, and that's why India can play a unique role in in developing projects in Iran. Thank you.
Nikita, thanks a lot. Now we have the last question, and afterwards I would like to ask all our esteemed panelists to give final remarks, just in the order you have had the floor. So the last question sounds: how do you evaluate Iran's foreign policy after the failure of its nuclear deal with the United States? Given its geostrategic position in West Asia, it has immense potential to play an important role for India. How do you see India's relations with Iran in the last years in the wake of immense diplomatic pressure from the United States?
I think I can make 2 introductory comments, and then the other experts can indicate. Yeah. So one thing that I noted is that in sort of the joint statement also, they have noted that India supports sort of Iran's bid to join the World Trade Organization, India also, even during during this investment in Chabahar port, India, I think, allowed Iran the investments to happen in rupees. So India has been, because Iran is sometimes forbidden to use to trade in dollars because of Western sanctions. Iran is sort of helped by India in these financial matters. Also, I think Iran and India have a very much pragmatic approach, and India, particularly from India's perspective, India has always been relations with warring parties. With, like, we have very cordial relations with Russia and US. We also have very cordial relations with the US. Along with that, we have very cordial relations with India as well, with Iran as well. And I think India has been able to balance both sides very and conveniently as per its necessities. I think it has also said that, I think there's also a point that, India is committed to the proper implementation of the JCPOA. So I think its full support to the implementation of the JCPOA. I think India has been taking steps that would be in its benefit. I think because India wants to reach Afghanistan. India's main problem in West Asia is Pakistan. So India is willing to ally with any other countries who would be willing partners in its collaboration in West Asia.
Thanks a lot. Okay. If there are no more comments to the question, then please, final remarks. Nikita?
I think, Dr. Velikaya, I think I have received another question. Actually, some members are sending me questions. Okay, so this question is, I don't know if it's a question or a comment. Okay, anyway, it's like, looking into the current volatile situation in Yemen and Libya, combined with major uncertainty in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, it is extremely important to engage Iran. So what are the long-term solutions that the Iranian government is going to opt for? With this, I also want to ask Stanislav and Nikita if they can answer. I was checking that, in the early times in 1973, I think the Shah of Iran first thought of making the Chabahar port when they were having tensions with Iraq, and later also because they couldn't use the Persian Sea. So how do you look at that, the present geostrategic situation of the Persian Sea and relations with Iraq? If you could comment on that. I mean, why is, our viewers would also understand, why is Oceanic port important for Iran today?
Well, speaking from Iran is trying to, Iran is highly dependent on Hormuz Strait. So the main goal when developing Chabahar port is to be less developed on the Hormuz Strait, because it's really very easy to stop any transport cooperation in the strait. It's very fragile way of making business with Iran. And it's not only about Chabahar, actually, because also Iran is trying to make a new port for exporting oil that is not in Persian Gulf. So Iran is trying to get out of Persian Gulf to get some alternative way of exporting things, and this is the main thing about the Chabahar port and other projects. That just today they announced about some plans of building another port that is also not in Persian Gulf. So I think this way, this approach will continue, and it's not just about, for example, current president administration of Rouhani in Iran. It's just strategic goal of Iran to get some new ways of exporting things, of connecting with world, and things like this. Well, and your question was also about Iraq, yes? About am I right?
Yeah. There was mention of Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, I think, with Yemen and Libya. Basically, the volatile situation, I think, the question talks about.
So yeah. Just in
no, I will repeat the question for you. It says, looking into the current volatile situation in Yemen and Libya, combined with major uncertainty in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, it is extremely important to engage Iran.
I actually didn't get the question.
Okay, so basically, the point is that the question, whoever has asked the question, is meaning that I think it is from the perspective of Russia or India that the other Middle Eastern countries are facing instability. So Iran is relatively stable, according to the person who is asking the question. So it is important to engage with Iran. It's
important to engage for whom? Oh, actually, I still don't get the question.
Yeah, I think there's a okay. I think let's say from the perspective of Russia or India, do you think it is important? Iran is more important in the Middle East than other countries, like because the other countries are facing instability.
Yeah. Well, to the point that we have now, yes, Iran is playing more a major role maybe in the region, and it's not. It is stable in comparison with other countries, and actually. To the point that we have now, there are just several countries that are really influencing the region. I mean that in the situation of instability, more and more these countries are trying to increase their influence in other countries, and they succeeded. So, of course, for example, if we're talking about Iraq 40 years ago, and even 30 years ago, it was another Iraq, and Iran couldn't play the role that it plays now. So, of course, to the point that we have now, Iran is maybe the most important country in the region if we're speaking about the influence on the ground. Because there's a lot of proxies in the region in several countries, and it has not only economical influence, but also the influence of political and even security influence and so on. But the point is, actually, I think that Iran is now at the peak of its influence if we're speaking about proxies and political things. And in the nearest future, it is highly likely that the influence in the region will a little bit decrease. So anyway, Iran is still one of the major countries in the region, but it wouldn't be the only player, and I don't think that we will see the thing that we've seen the last 15 years, that Iran was year by year increasing its influence in the region. I don't think that this process will continue in the nearest future. Thank you.
I think we can hear from Dr. Pritchin also.
Generally, I agree with Nikita, just with some remarks. Of course, Iran, to support this influence through proxy existence on the ground, which Nikita mentioned, of course, it costs money. And Iran, unfortunately, despite the fact that have quite effective instruments of influence on the ground, unfortunately, doesn't have for nearest future enough money to increase this influence drastically. But in situation when its counterparts, Saudi Arabia, for example, Syria, their stability is declining drastically, and stability, political problems and challenges are increasing. In such circumstances, Iran, of course, looks like quite stable, especially in the middle term perspectives, looks like quite effective and strong players in the region. If something new doesn't happen towards Iran, for example, stage of sanctions from the United States or something like this. Thanks a lot.
Maybe Dr. Awwad, would you like to?
Well, thank you. I think the answer to all this comes from who will preside over the pyramid of the power, the transitional power, which is either the United States or China. I think the fighting between the two bipolar world, which is asymmetric, at least for the moment, is going to take shape in the coming years. And I think even whoever is in power in the United States will continue the anti-China policy, and this will fall apart its impact not only on the Arab, on the Persian Gulf, or in the Mediterranean Sea, because the United States is losing its unipolar world, and it's feeling that recessions of its influence in the Mediterranean, in the Red Sea, and in the oceans is making her more focused toward China in the Asia Pacific, which is trying to militarize it. So I think the regional players are trying to do their dirty work in the region, where they are trying to get the resources out of the maritime boundaries, whether it is the Ottoman, the de facto Khalifa Erdogan in Turkey, who is trying to draw the lines, whether the American regime change policy, which has already started and they failed in Iraq. I think all this fall apart because if we look at the American and Iranian fighting is only started after the Iranian Revolution, 1979, because the Shah was the watchdog of the United States and Britain in the region for years. So when they changed the regime of Mossaddaqi in Iran, and they had the coup and brought the Shah to him, it was mainly meant for the American interest in this part of the world. So therefore, the GCC and the Persian Gulf will remain of a prime importance for the United States. And for a country like India, for a country like China, definitely they will try to find a path to gain out of this region of their own interest. So India maybe will be dragged into a new alliance with the United States, while China is trying to put its influence not only in the regional area, but also toward the whole globe. So it's a fight between the two giant powers, and there will be a multipolar world, and the conflict of interest maybe bring these countries together to divide the world for their influence. And I think countries will fall in the lines of these two in the near future.
Thank you so much. Professor Bhutani, would you like to comment on this?
I mean, my friend Dr. Awwad has mentioned a few interesting points. I mean, I'm in this age of 21st century, still talks about the beauty and the importance of civilizations between Iran and India, that whatever has happened is a short-term setback. Sooner or later, these two countries will get together. Well, it looks quite far-fetched, and let's hope if he proves correct. But I have my own doubts. I mean, I entirely agree with him. Whatever the system is there, Americans will be the spoiler of that system. You know, they have not allowed even Europe to breathe properly. You know, the way the Britain has come out from EU, that's all because of the American pressure. You know,
Absolutely.
and now where I live in Poland, unnecessarily, what you call, the Polish government has agreed to take 1,000 soldiers from Germany, and the country doesn't have enough money to eat, and will spend what you call $500 million to preserve the showpieces of 1,000 soldiers. And what for? So I think we in Asia should play our cards together. It is if you are talking about in a civilization way, it is Asia versus the West here. Until unless we allow ourselves to develop an Asian personality where Iran can play a constructive role, China and India and South Korea and Japan, you know. But so far, Americans have succeeded in playing one against the other, you know. And India unnecessarily tried to become more close to the Americans, you know, without getting anything in return. So the world looks to me more chaotic than ever before. And despite all our intelligence, etc., the mankind has failed to produce a vaccine. And we are talking about artificial intelligence. Nothing artificial intelligence has done so far. The great Israeli historian Yuval Hariri was talking blah, blah, blah for the next 10 years. And now he's totally quiet. There's nothing there. How a stroke of a virus has put the mankind behind 10 years, you know. So in this kind of a chaos, what kind of a situation will emerge, one is not sure. And even Xi is not that strong within his own country, you know. If he has started playing what I say, a high-stake game in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, in India, or with the South China Sea, obviously he wants to divert the attention of his people. And one thing we should not forget, the Chinese system is not exportable, you know. Ultimately, mankind needs a liberal order in this globe. So at the moment, like all of you, I am equally confused. I'm not sure whether tomorrow virus will come to my house or my sitting room. So what's the use of talking so big when we are not sure even of 7 days, you know? But, this is a job of the intellectuals, and they love to keep on making scenarios. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Putani, for your comments. And I must thank Dr. Pritchin, Nikita Smagin, Dr. Awwad, and of course, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat. Now I request the chair for today. Thank you, Dr. Anna Velikaya, Honorary Convenor and Advisor, to give the vote of thanks and close the session.
And thanks a lot, dear Soham, our dear distinguished panelists. Thanks a lot for sharing your view on the strategic connectivity project of Iran and regional powers, on its relations with India, with Central Asian states that Tillotoma Foundation is focused on, with Russia, with other Eurasian powers, with its difficult partner or even a competitor, United States. So thanks a lot for your in-depth knowledge, and hoping to stay in touch and participate in the upcoming Tillotoma Foundation sessions. Thanks a lot, and hoping to see you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you, Anna.